Hey guys, Sandy here, and as luck would have it, in May, I'm going to be returning to playing music live. I've taken a year off now because my son was born about a year ago, and well, I can't wait to get back into it. So I was kind of reflecting on it, and again, I'm looking forward to it, but it's got to be said, there are a few cons about playing, cover gigs in bars, that sort of thing. And I've done quite a few of them, so I thought I'd put it in a video. Anyway, here are six cons to playing cover gigs and playing in the bar circuit. Now, the first con that has to be mentioned, okay, some nights just plain suck, okay? Whether it's poor attendance, whether it's equipment malfunctions, I mean, Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. And you can prepare as much as you like. You can advertise a show as much as you like. Sometimes there are things that just happen that you have no control over. A good example, one of my last shows that I played right before I stopped, okay, it turned out that show ended up falling right on the day of, I think it was the Detroit Lions, it was some major sports team. It was a major sports team that they had like their final game where if they won that, they were going into the playoffs. So clearly people weren't going to go out to see a musician. They stayed home and they watched the game. Well, how do I control for that? You can't, okay? So it's got to be said, some nights really suck. A second hard truth is that when you are doing one of these shows, you're not necessarily an artist. Now, hear me out. There is absolutely nothing wrong with playing covers. Every musician covers other artists' music. That's just a fact, all right? But you quickly don't necessarily feel like an artist about the 100th time that you've played Brown Eyed Girl, okay? It's, for a lot of the time, you really are just there to be an expensive jukebox. Now, you can have fun with it, okay? You can put your own twist on songs, for sure. But a lot of the time, you got to accept you're basically just there as a worker. Now, speaking of being a worker, that kind of brings me to the third con here. And that is that you really have no rights. If someone cancels a show on you last minute, too bad, all right? The time that you work there, you kind of are on your own. Case in point, when COVID broke out in Canada, I knew a lot of musicians who gigging was pretty much their sole source of income. Well, the problem is the government didn't necessarily regard that as like a job. Okay, so, there was no real protections or anything like that. There was no extra money going out to these people like for that. It just doesn't happen. All right. If you get injured, if your equipment malfunctions, you're SOL. You're on your own. All right. If a drunk guy spills a beer on your amplifier, completely shorts it out, tough. You're kind of on your own. I mean, you're there. You have no real workers' rights, or that it doesn't happen in this. Now, speaking of a drunk spilling a beer on your amplifier, that brings me to the fourth hard truth about playing music in bars and playing cover gigs. The fact of the matter is that these are places where people go to drink. These are places where people go to do drugs. Let's keep it real, all right? There's been plenty of times where I've went into a bar bathroom and seen someone doing something illegal, all right? It's just the fact. So it's got to be said, some of these patrons can be remarkably obnoxious, all right? And it's just managing a drunk crowd is a skill that you kind of only develop the hard way, all right? And nothing really prepares you for that, but it's definitely a con. It's definitely something that can get you annoying. I actually have a video coming up, and because sometimes the drunkest people in the crowd aren't even necessarily the customers. Sometimes they're the staff. And at this point, I've actually had a video where I talked about that a few weeks ago. So anyway, that's another con. Some of the audience members, sometimes they're not so fun. Now, the fifth con of playing cover gigs is most of the time, all right, you don't necessarily have like a sound man, okay? And also, a lot of these places aren't necessarily built for playing music. The amount of times I've played in a bar or a restaurant or like a brewery where, like, I remember one because there was like, it was a brewery, so there was all like this metal machinery. Well, I gotta tell you, the echo in that room was just ridiculous. Really hard to control. Made my guitar feedback like crazy. So, and like, there was no sound man or anything. A lot of these places, like bars and restaurants, are just looking at it like, oh, if we bring in a musician, maybe they'll bring their fans and we can sell a few more beers. These aren't necessarily places built for music in mind. All right. So that's always something you got to keep in mind. Okay. That you kind of have to be your own sound man, and it can be really tricky, especially when you're on stage. So the amount of times I've asked the bartender, like, hey, is it sounding okay? I'm like, well, there's no real way of knowing when you're on stage. It's tricky. And the final major con of playing music in bars and doing cover gigs is the money. It's not necessarily that great. Okay. So full disclosure, I usually get paid $200 to $300 for a show. Okay. Usually it's typically like I'll get $200 and then I'll get usually $50 to $100 in tips. That's usually how it goes. That's certainly not a hard and fast rule. But also keep in mind, you got to factor in, like, yes, there's a time you're playing, which, let's say it's a 4-hour gig, $200 for 4 hours of music. That's $50 an hour. That's actually not terrible. But you also have to factor in all of that equipment costs money. You had to drive there. Okay. And like, depending on where you're driving from, like, I remember a few gigs, like I drove like 2.5 hours there and back. So all of a sudden that 4-hour gig, oh, and then there's another hour just of like setup and tear down time, if you're lucky. All right. So all of a sudden that let's say $300 just for this on the high end, $300. Let's say it's 2.5 hours for driving. There's 5. All right. Plus an hour of tear down. We're at 6, plus another 4 for the actual gig when you're actually playing music. That's 10. All of a sudden that $300, it's not looking so great. All right. And that's not even factoring the cost of the equipment. All right. So your time, the gas that you spend, it all counts. Sometimes the money isn't great. And that same way, I've had some big gigs that pay $300. I've had some that pay $100. All right. So something to keep in mind, you would make more money, more reliable money, working some kind of a job. Now, all of this is not to discourage you from playing music live, playing bar gigs. You can have a heck of a lot of fun. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to do a video on that next week where I talk about why you should play bar gigs, why you should play the bar circuit. All right. It's a lot of fun, so I don't want to discourage people from doing it. That said, you do need to know the truth of it. Anyway, subscribe for that video. That'll be coming out next week. Check out all my socials. And, if you're in Southern Ontario, check out my Facebook page. That's where I typically post all of my upcoming shows. And I hope to see you there. This is Sandy from Sandy's Guitars. Like and subscribe. Keep practicing. You're getting there. Take care.